So, in my fantasy novel, the first chapter belongs to the Prince of Wyldran, Devan Thorne, who at first might easily be mistaken for being your traditional fantasy protagonist, a young prince, right, destined to inherit the throne, etc., etc. Not that I really set out to subvert that trope or anything. In fact, most of my efforts throughout the Whiteworm Chronicles have been sort of to subvert the now common subversions of these tropes. But I digress. Um, Devon is an interesting one because he's this 16-year-old prince, this kid who's watching his own father die in the first chapter, and he is kind of okay with it. He doesn't want to be king necessarily, but the idea of, for once in his life, having power is not repellent to him because Devon he has a bit of a mean streak in him, and that's as a result of his terrible, horrible childhood. And he is considered weak and frail and looked down upon by many of the nobles at court. In earlier versions of the story, um, he was much better liked by the court, and he was also much more mean and spiteful, and he was a little bit more of a villain in the absolute earliest versions of the story. He was also a bit younger, and I'm not gonna lie, I think I'll be the first to admit that he more closely resembled the trope of the spoiled rich kid, right? Who's a tyrant and everything. But I am very glad that things took a wild turn from there into something much more interesting. Devon is kind of almost the main character in a lot of ways. And I'm proud to say that I think that I have an interesting character on my hands. Devon is this sickly young man with terrible coughing fits, and he is clever, yes, very very clever. He's an apprentice magician who lives in a world where magic is seen as mysterious and mercurial and powerful, a force of nature, which he is just only now beginning to learn how to tamper with. And yet he is racked with self-doubt and anxiety, and in some ways I suppose he's channeling that very youthful uncertainty, right, that fear that you're doing things right or not or wrong or whatever. And especially when I was younger, I know I felt similar, although I think Devon's in a he's much more miserable than I ever was. I mean, poor Devon, man. He is right off the bat. Devon is a product of an atrocity because his father, it was the King Fintan Thorne of Wyldran, and Fintan invaded a country called Alarant in the south. And this was years and years ago, and he killed the king of Alarant, and he took the king's children hostage. And the eldest of those children, a man named Tacitus, was sort of the heir at that point, was sort of in many ways, he's rightfully the king of Alarant, which is no more. But Tacitus was forced to sign this contract meant to end the war. It made Alarant a part of Wyldran, and it also married off his sister to the king. This sister, the Princess of Alarant, Lavinia is her name. She is Devon's mother, and she was a preteen girl when the marriage took place. Um, she was pregnant with Devon not long after, and while I, of course, try my best to avoid anything particularly graphic in the story, I do lean into the implied horror of this moment. Devon knows full well exactly what his father is, this monster who invaded a country and murdered a king and then arranged a forced marriage with the guy's child daughter. And Devan has been shaped by this horror, this knowledge of this terrible thing, and he has spent enough time with his mother and his uncles to feel sympathy for them, and slowly, Devan has been kind of shaped by his uncle Tacitus and his mother Lavinia into what they believe to be the perfect king. Only time will tell whether they're right or not, but it's a very wild thing. It's something that Tacitus and Lavinia think that they can use to not justify what they went through, but perhaps something to make it sting less. That this child is not his father. That this child can be more. And the kingdom is vast. It's no Westeros by far, but Wyldran is very large. It is considered by most other kingdoms in my world to be more like an empire with duchies as large as small kingdoms, and with a court full of crazy characters. Many of them have good reason to wish the king dead, um, while those outside the sort of direct influence of the crown think of him as this like genius war leader, this bold, fearless, incredible person, which only makes Devan more and more upset, because how can they love a man so evil? And that's just the first chapter there, right? The king is dying, and we don't know who poisoned him, if anyone poisoned him, but Devan's like, come on, the guy's the most horrible human being imaginable. Of course someone's trying to kill him. And Fintan himself, the king, he checked out in the latter half of his reign. Um, though when he first took over and when he first conquered Alorant, he began to consolidate his power, and he did take an interest in his son. Um, but he became quickly disillusioned by the sickly prince, and he turned his attention elsewhere. Um, it would be easy to do him in, right? At this point in time, Devan understands that by poison or by blade or by magic, the king can die. And Devan is a student of a magician, the Lord Mannion, the Stargazer, a holdover from the court of a previous king, and Lord Mannion is widely considered to be the smartest man possibly in the whole world. Um, while Devan is inspired by the likes of Alfred the Great and Octavian of Rome, Prince Hal, and Hamlet, his tutor Mannion is, I sort of took inspiration from the likes of like John Dee and Paracelsus and Nicholas Flamel and even Nostradamus a little bit, although more the public idea of these characters, that is, not the truths, but I think you get the picture. Um, Mannion also has a dash of Merlin in him, of course, and maybe a pinch of your Dumbledore type characters for good measure. He has taught Devan so much of the world, and he is nominally a pacifist. He is, if nothing else, he prefers to avoid violence if he can. Um, and when he must, Mannion is more than happy to throw down. In later chapters, we see how Mannion sort of wanted to kill the Devan's father, the king, for a very long time, but he thought better of it. He made plans and threw them out because he believes that murder is wrong. It is a sin. So there is some friction between him and Devan, which, I mean, Devan isn't exactly a murderer at any particular point in his career, but also Devan has to make some hard decisions as a future king, while Mannion, on the other hand, is willing to do anything to save a life, even if it means sacrificing his own. Mannion is considers himself to be, he holds himself to these very high standards. He is obsessed with doing the right thing. And so is Devan, but in a different way. Um, and that makes the Kingdom of Wyldran into this sort of powder keg in the story. In a lot of ways, right? There's these competing political forces at work, and Devan is trying desperately to be good and trying so hard. And Mannion is also trying to be good and do the right thing and to support Devan, but not at any cost. Um, and that is making things even more and more complicated with each passing chapter, really. Um, and while struggling to learn magic and to defeat this growing rebellion, Devan is forced to kind of turn his attention north as well, because people are coming in and talking about this Ash Wolf warlord of Scaldland, who is marching on their allies, right? Wodeland and Altaland and these other countries. And after their allies will come Wyldran itself. And because the Ash Wolf of Scaldland is out for blood completely. He will not stop with Wodeland, who is supposed to be his main target. He will come for Wyldran. That is what is being said, and it's not untrue. Devan's dark side shining through a little bit. I think he might not exactly have paid too much attention to these rumors if the situation was not brought directly before him. But you see, the situation is brought before him. In this very book, it's brought to him, and by none other than a girl who he finds desperately attractive, which, as I'm sure anyone with active hormones will tell you, that sort of goes a long way to toward changing your mind about a thing. And Devan just spends the entire book, really. He struggles with his past in The Wolf at the Door and beyond. He struggles with his origins and with his own desires. And it is his struggle to do the right thing, to be a good king and a good person, that defines his journey. I personally like to think that I did a good job portraying a confused, hormonal, chronically unwell teenager. um, I think I did a good job at that, especially seeing as I was one rather recently, not too many years ago. Um, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and like and subscribe while you're at it. I post videos every week, usually on Monday, but recently I've also been doing a sort of Friday special where I talk about me and my books, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But that's all for now, so yeah.